In this class, I want to talk about the market and introduce the market. In fact, this is one of several classes in which we will introduce the market. It's such an important topic. We need to have very clear thinking about it, how it works, where it stands in the scheme of things, why it's important. There's so many issues to talk about with the market. But in today's session, I want to go back to the start, really. Or probably that's not the right way to put it, but back to the early days of the market and talk about this gentleman for a moment. This is Alfred Marshall, and it's his book in 1890, The Principles of Economics, that really gives us the understanding of the market we use today, supply and demand and equilibrium and many aspects of what we think about economics. Marginal utility, cost of production, and so on. So many. So a lot of gratitude to Alfred Marshall, who lived between 1842 to 1924. So let's deal with Marshallian economics. Now, the market may be defined as any arrangement which brings buyers and sellers of a particular product together. So it's just an arrangement whereby buyers and sellers meet and trade. They exchange goods, they exchange money, they reciprocate in some way. They receive the good and they reciprocate to do something else. They contract to do something else. So the market is any arrangement which brings buyers and sellers of a particular product together. That's all a market is. Now, we've talked about supply and demand in several sessions, and here I'm going to use the diagram straight away. I assume that you have looked at this in the other classes and you're familiar with it. So on the vertical axis here, we've got the price. I'll just put the cursor on. Here we've got the price per unit, and down here we've got the quantity per unit of time. So we say the price is so much for every unit sold, and the quantity per unit of time is the quantity sold, the quantity demanded per week or per day, per year, whatever it is. We specify a time period down here, and we're consistent. So Q1 would be a certain amount demanded at the price P1 in a given time period. So that's our demand curve, and we talk about this in several classes, so it should be familiar to you. We also can have shifts of the demand curve. Here on this one we have the price determines the demand, the price and quantity. That's all we've got here. But we could have an arrangement where we can imagine income being important, or tastes, or advertising, something else will influence demand. So when we have just one determinant like here, we say ceteris paribus, which I talk about in other classes. In other words, we hold everything else constant. Everything is constant except price. We look at the relationship between price and output, price and demand, I should say, and hold everything else constant. Just ignore all the other changes. Over here, we've got price, and we could have income. Price, income, and output. Again, we're holding the influence of advertising. We're holding tastes. We're holding government pronouncements on the good. Sometimes the government might say this good is dangerous, or this good is injurious to your health. So we're holding everything constant. Over here, we're not holding literally everything. We're allowing price to change, and we're allowing, let's say, income, or the influence of advertising. Something else has changed here, moving us from demand 1 to demand 2. And we simply move along the curve in this way. So we've got this concept of demand, and it's dealt with in other classes that we deal with. We can have a leftward shift of the curve. A leftward shift of the curve will be caused by one or more of the following. So, for example, a fall in income if the good is normal. If it's a normal good and we suddenly have less income, we will buy less. We have less income. A fall in the price of a substitute good. If we're buying something and one of its substitutes become cheaper, we might switch over and buy that. If the price of a complementary good increases, we might buy less. If the price of petrol rises dramatically, we might buy less petrol-driven cars. So the demand will shift to the left, like I've got here. Shift to the left. A change in tastes away from the good. Suddenly the good becomes unfashionable. In the past it was relatively fashionable, people bought it. Now no one wants to be seen with it. And that will cause a leftward shift of the curve. So we can imagine more than 5, but these 5 will survive for the moment. We've got the idea that events can happen that causes the demand to fall. At the going price, the demand will fall. So we don't just get a variation in demand because price is moving. We can get it for various reasons. Like I've got 5 on the screen at the moment. We could have a lot more if we carried on. Now the market supply. Well, the supply has a positive relationship with price. At least that's what we assume. That as the price rises, producers will put more on the market. As the price rises, it becomes more profitable, so they're more interested in supplying the good. So the supply curve is upward sloping. So if this is for a company, call it company A, as the price rises, it produces more. So the supply curve is positively sloped. In this case, we say that the price is P1 and the quantity supplied is QA. Now for a second company, firm B, again we have the price per unit on the vertical axis and the quantity per unit of time on the horizontal axis. And at the going price P1, it'll produce QB. So the total between them at this price P1, the total must be QA plus QB. The amount produced by firm A plus the amount produced by firm B. Add the two together and we get the total output. So at price P1 we simply add QA to QB and we get the total market output. If there are 2 firms in the market, 2 producers, at the price P1 add both together and we get the total market output. Now what are the determinants of the market supply? Well, the price, that almost goes without saying. As the price rises, producers will have more incentive to produce more. They'll want to sell more as the price rises. As the price falls, they will cut back on production and they will produce less. So the price is certainly a determinant of the amount supplied, as is the price of related goods. Related goods could be in 2 forms, and we'll talk about this in different sessions as well. But for the moment, the price of related goods could be on the market. If the price of petrol rises, significantly rises, the demand for electric cars may increase. The supply of electric cars may increase because the price of petrol means less petrol cars are required or are wanted. So there is a linkage between the relationship between goods, electric cars and petrol-driven cars are related. Income. Well, as we as consumers have more income, we may want to demand more, and therefore companies may want to supply more in order to make a profit. So our incomes will determine the amount in the market. If the country's going through a big recession, a lot of people out of work, then the supply will be cut back because we don't have the money to spend. Technology within the firm. As technology improves, becomes cheaper, perhaps the company will produce more. If the technology becomes more sophisticated and more expensive, then the company might start to produce less. So the costs within the business is related to the technology it uses. If it's labour saving and cheap, then perhaps output will increase. Depends on the goals of the firm. So some companies want to be big. Some companies want to be small. Some companies are family-run businesses and they don't want to expand. They don't want to make it more complicated and more sophisticated and move location and expand. They don't want that. They want to have small business that they make enough money to be happy, and they don't want complications. So the goal of the firm will determine its size as well. It's another factor, as is tax. As the company gets bigger, it might move into different tax schedules or more tax complications. So maybe keeping the company small and keeping it simple might be a consideration on the part of the owners. So the size of the business will depend on the sophistication of the tax system. And there are different other factors. For example, the weather. The weather might be a determinant of supply. Clearly, in the case of farming, that is true. That the market supply for vegetables and for fruit and for crops depends on the weather. So we can envisage lots of determinants for market supply. Now the supply curve, well, movement along the curve versus shift of the curve, and we talk about this in different cases, but let's just go over and look at it again. Here's the supply curve. As the price rises, we'll assume more is supplied. Now, that's ceteris paribus, holding everything else constant. So we're holding all the factors, all the determinants of market supply that I've just looked at, the tax system, the weather, and so on. We're holding everything constant. So now supply depends entirely upon the price. So if the price is P1, then the quantity, let's say, is Q2. That's the quantity supplied. If the price falls from P1 to P2, then the quantity supplied will fall from Q2 down to Q1. We get a contraction in the supply. If the price falls, the producers are willing to produce less. They want to produce less because the price has fallen. It's not as profitable. They're not getting as much out of it. So they don't want to dedicate resources to its production. So the supply will fall on the market. Now, supply depends on many factors, as I just mentioned earlier. I'm not going to go through them again. I suggest you stop the video and make a note of these. But they are some of the determinants of the supply curve. We could write this in symbols, which is what we often do. We have to define the symbols. Well, I'd say if I just, here, look at this one here, QST, quantity supplied per unit of time. Okay, quantity supplied depends per unit, supplied per unit of time, equals F. F means function of in mathematics. We don't mean it like that. We're just using the same symbol, but we're not doing mathematics here. But we use the term. We borrow it from mathematics, and mathematics doesn't seem to mind. So F means, in our case, depends on. F equals, in inverted commas, depends on. Write it down, remember it. We see in economics, in an expression like this, we say the output, the quantity supplied per unit of time, QST, the quantity supplied per unit of time depends on, F, the price per unit, PU, Y for income. Income in economics is always written as a Y. It's a tradition. Just noted. It's not I, it's Y. Y for income. So the supply, quantity supplied every week or every month, whatever, depends on the price per unit, income, health. I've made the list here, number 3 on the list over here, health. F for fashion, necessary goods, the weather, anything else you can imagine. This thing can be very long. It can be many more expressions in here. I'm not attempting to be all complete and wrapped up in this expression. I'm just saying that's the way it works. Now, it's a very complicated expression. All these different variables, all these different determinants can be moving in different directions at different times and at different rates. So it becomes very complicated. So what we do is we use this Latin expression, ceteris paribus, to make it easy. Now we say, look, the supply per week or per month, whatever, supply per unit of time depends on, F, depends on the price per unit. And all the rest of them we'll ignore. And because we ignore them, we say ceteris paribus. Everything else being constant. We're holding everything constant. You could say, well, we're cheating. Yes and no. No, we're not, because we're focusing in on the relationship between the price and the quantity. So no, we're not cheating. We're just trying to analyze, at least in our minds, we're trying to work out what would be the relationship between the price and the quantity. Just ignore everything else. We can look at those later and see what the relationship between income and demand and supply is. We can do that later. Say a change in the supply, not caused by a change in price. Let's say I'm moving from S to S1 over here. S to S1. We'll say this is S, this is S1 down here. That may be caused by a fall in the price of inputs. If machinery that's needed to produce this item becomes cheaper or becomes cheaper to use, then we'd expect more to be supplied. The supply curve will expand, it will move outwards. And the example here, the price of bread may fall because of a good wheat harvest. Yes, one of the inputs for bread, wheat, becomes cheaper. And as it becomes cheaper, more bread can be produced. So, the supply depends on many factors, and I've listed out some of them here. There might be more. It doesn't matter. The point is we know there are many determinants for it. And we also know that when we write these down in shorthand, like here, it doesn't become very nice. So we make it nicer by writing it up here like this. But when you do that, you have to tell everyone you're holding things constant. You're holding certain variables. You're making the variables into constants. You're assuming it. So, for example, fashion here. Well, we're holding fashion constant. It doesn't change. Health and safety concerns don't change either. So we're holding all of that constant, and that enables us to have supply against the price. Now, earlier on we had the demand against price, and now we've got supply and demand against price. You can see where we're going here. We could have two variables just before we leave this. We could have price and income, or income and fashion, or income and the weather, or something. We can vary it. And if you do that, if you write down two variables here and a dependent variable over here. This one depends on these two, so we call it the dependent variable. If you do that, then we just have two curves. We have this one, and then when income changes, we have this new one. And if income changes again, we'd have a third one. So it just causes a shift of the curve. When we have this sort of expression, we have two. We can't go more than this because we can't draw the diagrams. We'd have to go into 3 dimensions or even 4 dimensions. And that's a bit more like science fiction to us. So the supply simply shifts around. And at a going price, if, let's say, health and safety concerns, were raised over a certain product, a report came out that it might not be very good for us or not healthy, then the supply might shift from supply 1 to supply 2, and at the going price, less will be supplied, because there's now been a health warning that this item may not be very good for us, so the producer will cut back on production. They don't want to lose by producing a lot which are not going to be sold. So that's our introduction to the market. Almost 22 minutes. Let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.